President Biden's mental capacity is in question this morning following special counsel Robert Hur's report accusing him of being, quote, an elderly man with a poor memory, too feeble to prosecute. Hur writing Biden did not remember when his son Beau died or when his vice presidential term ended. Republican and Democrats are claiming that the report could damage Biden's 2024 reelection. Here's former Director of National Intelligence John Ratcliffe with me yesterday on Sunday Morning Futures about the legal impact of this report.
I think that this is actually going to have a significant legal impact, beyond the public's perception of a two-tiered system of justice, an actual impact on the same case and the same charges against Donald Trump. If I'm the federal judge down in Florida looking at this, Judge Cannon, I'm thinking, why is this case even in my court? And the next time special counsel Jack Smith shows up in my courtroom, my question for him would be, look, I've got a 300-page report from another special counsel from the same Biden Justice Department who says that the target in that case, Mr. Biden himself, committed every element of every crime that's set forth in here, but the Department of Justice says we're not going to charge him. And yet here you are in my courtroom saying that it's a matter of national interest that we not only move forward with these charges, but that we absolutely do so before the November election. It just doesn't jive. And so I think that that's very likely what's going to happen here.
Joining me right now is former acting U.S. Attorney General Matthew Whitaker. Good to see you, Matthew. Thanks for being here. What is your reaction to all of this, and in particular, the legal implications of that special counsel report?
Yeah. Well, I look at it in a couple different ways. First of all, I think prosecutors have not done a good job explaining the difference between the cases because it's hard to explain that there is a difference. In fact, the difference, as I have thought and looked about this case, is how the cases were approached from the very beginning. When Joe Biden rediscovered, I guess, the documents he had possessed for, up to decades, he reached out to the archives and the DOJ, and they just showed up and took possession of them. Obviously, in the case of Donald Trump and Mar-a-Lago, they conducted a raid on the former president's house, and with a full show of the force of the law, and that's, I think, we're the starting point. And then you get into the reasons why they declined prosecution on Joe Biden, and really the only reason they can point to was his mental state, is the fact that he would be a sympathetic elderly man with memory issues, and I think that's dramatically inconsistent with how law is done. There's equal justice under the law, and right now that's not what we see in this case.
No, it's not. And, I'd like to know how it's possible to make the case that the commander-in-chief in the White House right now running the free world is too feeble to prosecute, but he's apparently just fine to run America.
Right. And, the press seemed especially keen to report this feature that they've been unwilling to do, even though they observe him every day at these events, and they see how he can't walk off the stage, how he confuses things, how he can't even, quite frankly, follow a teleprompter without extemporaneous comments that get him in trouble. And so, this is something that I think the mainstream media has been very complicit on, is the fact that Joe Biden is missing a step. His fastball is not as fast, and he can't remember important dates. If you think about how important it is to the context of history, for example, to understand the decisions you need to make as the United States president, if you can't remember basic dates like when you started to be vice president, when you ended your term as vice president, and other important key facts, that is a dramatic problem for the president of the United States. And, from what I can tell, the vice president, is equally deficient in many areas.
Yeah, look, I got to tell you, last week I sat down with President Trump for an hour and 15 minutes. He sat there and he answered my questions straight for an hour and 15 minutes. I don't think Joe Biden can do it. I don't see a scenario where President Biden sits with me knee to knee the way President Trump did for an hour and 15 minutes. He couldn't even do the Super Bowl interview for 20 minutes with Norah O'Donnell, which, of course, would have included the softball question of who's going to win the Super Bowl. And yet, right. Matthew, go ahead.
No, and what his flavor of ice cream is. I mean, let's be honest. It's not just sitting down. It's not just sitting down with you, Maria, or the CBS, friendly interview. It's the fact that there's an easy way for Joe Biden to prove that he is up to the job, and that is to take press conferences, to sit down for longer interviews, and he can't do it. And that's why you don't see him doing it. You see him in highly scripted public events, reading off a teleprompter, not taking questions. And if he does take questions, they're off a card. The next day I was shocked to see him sit down with the German chancellor and again, have his note card and specifically read off of those cards with no extemporaneous opportunity to, screw up random questions that he might have to take.
Well, they're all protecting him now, the Democrat Party and the White House. The White House counsel has gone even a step further to ask the special counsel, Robert Hur, to revise some of the language in the report. The lawyers at the White House are declaring the descriptions of the president's memory inflammatory, quote unquote inflammatory. Biden's also pushing back against the report in his memory, despite mixing up the president of Mexico with the president of Egypt on the night he's telling us his memory is fine. Watch this.
My memory is not good. My memory is fine. My memory, take a look at what I've done since I become president. None of you thought I could pass any of the things I got passed. How'd that happen? I guess I just forgot what was going on. As you know, initially, the president of Mexico, Sisi, did not want to open up the gate to allow humanitarian material to get in. I talked to him. I convinced him to open the gate. I talked to Bibi to open the gate on the Israeli side. I've been pushing really hard to get humanitarian assistance into Gaza.
Oh, boy. Let me tell you something, Liz Peek. Nobody wants to be talking about this. We're all patriots and we love our country, but this is just in plain sight. And if we're watching this, imagine what our adversaries are saying. China is laughing all the way to the bank. The Communist Party has been exploiting this weakness in the White House from day one.
There's no question, Maria, and it's hurting our country. We don't want to be talking about it, except it's really, really important for voters to remember when they go to vote in the fall that they're not voting for Joe Biden, they're voting for Kamala Harris. And I think that should be a wake-up call to everybody. But I want to ask Matthew on the documents issue, isn't Biden's case actually worse in the sense that as senator, he had absolutely no right to take any documents out of the Capitol, and my impression is that he actually did that. That seems to me kind of an entirely different category of irresponsibility and lawbreaking than anything that President Trump did as president.
No, you're absolutely right. And, if you think about these cases, Joe Biden actually had to have taken these documents from the Senate SCIF in a clandestine manner and snuck them out. And remember, as vice president, he doesn't have the same ability to declassify documents, nor does he have the Presidential Records Act that allows him to retain all documents and has a process for determining what he can and can't keep. So, yeah, the cases are quite different. And in every instance, Joe Biden's case is worse. But again, they had to find a hook to get him off. You knew that they were not going to charge Joe Biden in this case. And so they found this mental capacity issue, which is, caused all sorts of political consequences for the White House.
Yeah, and, now we're waiting on the Supreme Court. We've got to rely on the Supreme Court for all of this. The SCOTUS is appearing skeptical of Colorado's decision to kick former President Trump's name off of the state's ballot. After hearing oral arguments last week, Matthew, I spoke with John Ratcliffe, and he says that this decision is going to come within the next 2 weeks. And he believes that the Supreme Court will ultimately rule in favor of Trump, and that name will stay on the ballot. Your reaction, what are you expecting?
Yeah, well, first of all, John's a great guy and a good friend of mine, and I agree with him. I mean, if you listen to that hearing, it was pretty clear that all 9 of the justices were skeptical that Colorado had the ability to keep Donald Trump off the ballot for many different reasons, whether it was due process or other arguments. But, it's the difference between politics and law. It's very easy to, make these throwaway statements in politics, but in the law, these words matter, that the Constitution has meaning and structure. And so it was very good, I think, that the Supreme Court brought an adult voice to the room to discuss how ridiculous what Colorado was trying to do.
Well, I mean, look what we're all dealing with right now, AG. The fact is that when Joe Biden chose Kamala Harris to be his vice president candidate or his running mate, you know, it feels like they chose her for all the wrong reasons. And I spoke with President Trump last week, and I said to him specifically, what is your criteria for choosing your running mate, for choosing your vice president? And he said there's only one thing to know. You have to believe that that person can step in, can be the president at any time, because things happen, President Trump told me. Now, here we are. Things are happening. People are worried about Joe Biden. And we're all questioning whether or not his VP pick, because she checked all the boxes that he wanted, is actually ready.
No, you're absolutely right. And this is where, identity politics always bites the left because, she was chosen solely because she checked multiple boxes in one person.